when I was running Warner's Television, Fred was running Warner Brothers Features, or he had started running it. And he moved from the executive chair to an independent producer chair fairly quickly over there. And one of the first properties he developed was a script called Kung Fu. And unintroduced, he just walked in my office one day. This was probably early 71. And he plopped down the script on my desk. And I said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm Fred Weintraub. I thought you'd like this for television." And I said, "What's a Kung Fu?" I truly didn't know. And he explained that it was, and told me what it was, and said that it was a script he'd had developed as a movie. And probably for Bruce, because he already knew him from getting prepared for Enter the Dragon. But he said, "I can't get the movie guys to do it." So I read it, and it was just sensational. It was a great script. And I called him the next day, and I said, "This thing is fabulous, but I can't afford to do it for television. It's too expensive." And this big Brooklyn guy thinks for a minute, and he says over the phone, "Tear out every other page." I thought, okay, that's my kind of producer. Let's bring it down to TV level. Anyway, we didn't do that, obviously, but we rewrote it for TV so we could afford a television budget. The head of the studio, Ted Ashley, called me because he knew that I had the television series, or a hoped-for series, Kung Fu, in development, and we had not cast it yet. I don't think we even had a script yet. And he told me that the studio was contemplating making a movie with Bruce Lee, which ultimately turned out to be Enter the Dragon. And strangely enough, many years later, I learned that the studio had made a deal with Bruce Lee that in exchange for starring him in the movie, they gave him $10,000, $20,000 against a possible television show. But they didn't tell me that at the time. I mean, Ted was a lovely man who wanted me to make up my own mind. He didn't want to influence me. But I had never heard of Bruce Lee, so he was a complete stranger to me when he walked in my door to interview, audition, whatever actors do, for the role of Caine in Kung Fu. It wasn't hard to form a first impression of Bruce. Bruce was a very impressionable young man. I had never had an actor walk in my door holding a gym bag in one hand and kicking my door closed with his foot. So Bruce walked in the office, gym bag in hand, pulled out his nunchuck, and started swinging it at me. I'm not a martial arts guy. I'm a producer. And this thing is zipping by my nose. And I was like, "What are you doing? Don't move." And I said, "Don't worry. I'm not going anywhere. Would you put that thing down?" And he put it away, and he thrust his arm for us. "Feel my arm." And it was like steel. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So what were my first impressions? Probably crazy, dynamic. Wow. Anyway, we talked for about a half an hour. And, he had his book, like actors do, showed me pictures of himself in these movies, which I never heard of. I didn't know anything about his career because Ted Ashley hadn't told me anything about it. And as magnetic as he was, I was looking for a guy to do a television series, not a movie, not one pilot, but hopefully years, whatever. And Bruce was honestly a little bit hard to understand. His English was a little difficult to understand. And I thought to myself, week after week on network television, I don't know. And when you do a movie, you have the luxury of looping. You can fix dialogue, you can fix anything. With a television series, you really can't do that. And that was the major part of it. And another part was that this was a real acting role. And Bruce was, as we all know, the premier martial artist of all time, I guess. But you can't do an hour of fighting every week as a television series. It's a real acting job. Looking back, he might have been great in it. Might have been. We went through, if I tell you every Asian actor in Hollywood, I don't think I'm exaggerating, or partially Asian. And when we just couldn't find one that ABC was happy with, Warner Brothers was happy with, I was happy, everybody was happy with. We had a meeting at ABC. I'll never forget this. George Takei, who I guess wanted the part, but he was the main agitator, saying, you can't hire a non-Asian for this role. And I kept saying to him, we don't want to. You find me somebody that you think would be right for this role. So we went to ABC, and the network basically told us, you have to use an Asian for the role. We're a network, and we're the ones who are going to get in trouble. And I said, let's go through the list. Let's look at every name and we did with them. And it finally came down to nobody agreed on any Asian actor who was right. I would say that he was one of two people considered. I mean, there really were not a lot of. We read. I can't tell you how many actors we read, but nobody was seriously considered other than him and David Carradine. I was worried. I was very concerned. This is a very specific role, and everybody involved wanted to cast it ethnically. It was written that way. I can't say I was the only one. I would say everybody involved really wanted to have an authentic Asian actor in the role. It just didn't work out. The audience for Kung Fu was a very young, hip audience. It started, as a lot of these things do, on college campuses, and then it spreads to the younger elite, out of college. And then if it spreads beyond that, then you have a major hit. No, I don't think they would have had any trouble accepting him at all. Whether his pure acting skills would have upheld it, I don't know. As much as it was not a picnic working with David Carradine, he was a terrific actor. Bruce was a terrific martial artist. In watching what he did on The Green Hornet, which I had access to at the time that we were, looking at Kung Fu, and a few of his films, here was a guy who was maybe Americanized is the wrong word for it, but he was just, he wasn't playing a Chinese character. He was playing Bruce Lee, which was an international kind of a guy. Nobody ever looked back. And maybe that was because, if I had my chronology right, maybe Kung Fu was already a hit. And when you have a hit, people don't look back and say we should have done something different. The first time I saw Bruce on screen, my impression of him was very much the same as the first time he walked into my office. This was just a dynamic ball of energy. You couldn't take your eyes off of him. And watching him fight was like a revelation. But having done, again in partnership with Fred, a Bruce Lee documentary, I learned more from doing that than I ever learned about him during the Kung Fu era. And I saw what he did, and he certainly revolutionized the whole notion. In doing the documentary on him, I learned a lot about this guy, and it was a combination of his personal dynamism, his athletic prowess, and his intelligence. He was a really smart guy. He knew how to market himself, and he knew what he had, and he developed what he had. There's a lot of Hollywood people we work with, whether their skill is as an actor or a stuntman or a writer, whatever, and they pretty much coast on their natural abilities. There are guys who are just terrific writers. But I've never seen anybody work on what he had the way Bruce did. He really developed. He developed his body, he developed his spirituality, and he developed his relationship to the community. And I think you could say he really made the most of what he had. I think Bruce Lee has meant everything to the world of action films. When I look at I call them flying films of today, Crouching Tiger, the mode of stylistic fighting that's going on today, I can't look at that stuff without thinking about Bruce Lee. What Bruce would have done with this technology would have been mind-boggling. But I don't think all of this would have come about without Bruce first turning the world's head around from martial arts as something that goes on, thousands of miles away, to this is an accessible art form, and I'm going to show you how it works, pal. And I think he just turned the world around and made Hollywood producers think about these kinds of action films where I don't think they would have thought about them. We talk about looking for the next Bruce Lee all the time. You can't help it. And just because of who we are, we have producers, managers, whatever, come in here all the time with tapes of, wait till you see this guy. He's more dynamic than Bruce Lee. And they never are. Nobody comes close. Some of them are really good martial artists. Some of them have great bodies. Some of them have a wonderful presentation. But nobody's got the combination of everything that Bruce had. If I had it to do all over again, would I use Bruce Lee as Kane? I would love to try it. Yeah, love to try it.